Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Backtrekking, the podcast where we look back at the real-world inspirations behind classic episodes of Star Trek. I'm one of your hosts, Caliban, and the man from Earth can help you save 15% or more on your car insurance. I'm joined on this episode by my co-host.
Fire Bad. I'm Gooey Fame. Hi.
And we've returned to explore the stories behind your favorite Trek shows. And this week we're talking about a film and a Star Trek episode that each deal with the question of immortality and a man that cannot die. It's the 2007 film The Man from Earth and the Star Trek The Original Series episode Requiem for Methuselah.
Ooh.
Yeah, talking about some serious, well, a guy that can't die, obviously, but some serious themes about humanity here. Both the film and the episode were written by sci-fi author Jerome Bixby. Bixby also wrote the TOS episodes Mirror, Mirror, By Any Other Name, and Day of the Dove. And he's also the writer of the famous Twilight Zone episode It's a Good Life. And this film that we're talking about today was really his last work. He died in 1998, and it was completed on his deathbed, and it was dictated to his son, Emerson Bixby.
Okay, yeah. And depending on if you watch these back to back, one is kind of a spoiler for the other.
Yeah,
if you know they're associated.
That's true. There's so much going on in the Star Trek episode, though, that it's hard to really spoil. There's a bunch of different things, a lot of hats stacked on top of each other. But of course,
True.
We'll talk about that when we get to our talking about the episode. But first, little news from the world of Star Trek, and of course, it's sad news that that Nichelle Nichols has passed away at the age of 89, the original actress behind Uhura.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say. That's obviously such a huge loss. You know, one of the most iconic people in all of Star Trek. You know. Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing. I mean, we're going to talk about it today. Mortality. There's nothing anybody can do, and it's just something that you have to expect. But it's interesting the way that the TOS actors have kind of left us in stages. Really, it's been once a decade. Of course, DeForest Kelley passed away in the 90s, and Jimmy Doohan passed away in the 2000s, and of course we lost Spock last decade. So hopefully, fingers crossed, this is it for this decade. And we can hold on to what we've got.
That would be great news for Shatner if he could hold out to be like 115. He will. He'll probably live to be 200 years old.
Yeah, so. He's going to bury us all. What if he gathered us all together in a cabin and told us a strange story about a man who was born in Canada 14,000 years ago? But of course, Nichelle Nichols, not only a talented actress and singer, but really, a civil rights icon, somebody who had brushes with greatness, brushes with Martin Luther King, a man who told her that her role was important and caused her to continue in that role, and also went on herself to become an ambassador for NASA and is responsible for, I mean, we explicitly know, Sally Ride, Mae Jemison, and other people becoming astronauts, but who knows how many other young women, young people of color who decided to follow their dreams into STEM fields and into space because of her influence. So she will definitely be missed.
Yeah, easily, I think one of the just, there's all the accolades and all this cool stuff, but just at the face of it, just one of the coolest people who's been part of Star Trek for sure.
Absolutely. And somebody who, I don't know, you look at her body of work, she did voice acting work and some acting work after Star Trek, but not somebody who, like the aforementioned Shatner was doing commercials and doing TV shows and lots of other stuff. I don't know if it was because she was a private person or maybe she did suffer the kind of typecasting that Star Trek actors are worried about, but we just definitely didn't get, I think, we could have had more. I would have liked to have had more Nichelle just in real life and in her roles on screen. And so we were blessed to get what we did. And it's really touching to see people just talking about her, sharing stories, fans talking about their interactions with her. And it's really great to see how well loved that she was.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, of course, her legacy is being carried on by Celia Rose Gooding. on Star Trek Strange New Worlds and is in good hands.
Yeah, she's been great.
Yeah, she really has. And you can tell that they are really treating the character. I mean, the show obviously itself is, a legacy show, but they are definitely treating the character, I think, with a lot of respect and using her as kind of that linchpin and connection, even more explicitly, I think, than a character like Spock, of course, who continues into TOS, but really just sort of judging where we've come with a yardstick that's sort of measured, viewed through a lens of the character of Uhura and Spock as well. So looking for good things going forward from Strange New Worlds and from that actress and people just remembering Uhura. I've, of course, been watching the TOS films for Enterprising Individuals and just getting to see her evolution as a character, going from being basically what we'd expect out of TOS, Uhura, and TMP, just kind of like got that thing in her ear and talking about what she hears on the radio, but becoming a more dynamic character, a funny character. Uhura had, Nichelle Nichols had great comedic chops, and getting to see that more as the TOS films go on was great.
Yeah, definitely in the films for sure. I always remember it's kind of they always did a good job of like giving everyone something to do in those TOS films. Well, at a certain point they did, and I always love when she hijacks the transporter. That's one of my favorite parts in the TOS movies. Yeah,
it's interesting that she is the character of Uhura has such a prominent place on Strange New Worlds because she's like the one actor or character that we didn't really get to revisit it all in TNG, to get to see her, show up like Scotty does or like McCoy or Spock does, or even seeing like Chekhov in something like Generations. She just sort of like takes a powder after Star Trek VI. And so it's great to continue to build on her legacy and the legacy of characters like Christine Chapel.
And of course, sure.
Captain Pike as well on that show. So
yeah,
Nichelle Nichols will be missed, and hailing frequencies closed, I guess, as people are saying.
Oh.
Well, from that to a naked begging for attention, I just wanted to mention that I will be representing the Just Enough Trope podcast at Convergence Convention in the Twin Cities this weekend. When you're listening to this, the weekend starting on the 11th of August and running through to the 14th. I'll be a guest at the con and appearing on some panels talking about Star Trek and some other pop culture things. And I'll be hosting a live episode of the Enterprising Individuals podcast at the con, continuing our trip through the Star Trek films. We'll be talking about Star Trek First Contact at the con with a panel of special guests, and we'll be live streaming that on Twitch. This is Saturday at 2 p.m. Central. We'll be going live on Twitch, twitch.tv/EISTPOD. If you want to tune in and hear us there. If you missed the show, that's okay. It'll be on the main feed as our First Contact show on the Enterprising Individuals main feed, which you can find on your listening platform of choice, also at enterprisingindividuals.com. So looking forward to getting back to Convergence Con.
That should be exciting. Great. That's a great movie. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, nothing. I'm trying to think of just, to be even-handed, I'm trying to think of bad things to say about the film for my program.
There's
and I don't really have anything bad to say.
There are, but it's like, it doesn't really bother me. You know what I mean? Like, I've heard it all, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it's
like, I agree, but I don't care.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is, obviously you're going to bring TNG to the big screen. You root through the toy box and, what do we got? And obviously the Borg is going to come up.
Yeah.
And, their kind of changing of the Borg, or at least their heightening of the Borg stakes for the film includes, of course, creating the character of the Queen, which I'm not sure was a great idea, but would definitely go on to provide Voyager a lot of drama. And so I guess maybe the idea of a Borg Queen would be something that I would quote unquote complain about if I had to complain. But it is a pretty well made film.
Oh yeah.
So we're talking about that. One of these days we have to do a live backtrekking in front of a studio audience.
Oh geez. Okay. I have to psych myself up for that.
Yeah.
What's great about this is I'm like, well, if I say something embarrassing, it'll probably get edited, or like no one will notice. But live, it'll be. I've never done a live podcast, I don't think.
All your mistakes will be out there for everyone to see.
Yeah.
But that's the way that it is. Assuming that we don't, it has to be something really special. And of course, we don't really make any distinction on this show talking about the work of actual living or dead artists, films, TV shows, books. So I don't know what special topic we could cover for a live backtracking show. But I do know that we could save the last 10 minutes of the panel for people's suggestions, a little bit of audience participation.
Oh,
but
that would
secretly,
be so fun.
we'd just be writing everything down. It's like, yeah, feed us, you little slobs.
Let's just do that.
Give us ideas
the
for
whole
the show.
panel is that.
Yeah, right. We'll just sit there and go.
You tell us.
You are the.
And then we'll do it live.
Yeah.
Whether we've seen it or not, or like read it or whatever, we'll do it live.
There we go. We'll just fire them off live and create some content the old-fashioned way. Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to being at Convergence. Check it out, convergence-con.org. If you'll be in the Twin Cities area, tickets are still available, so check that out. But let's get to our prepared feature for today. Ever since humanity has become aware of its existence, it was also aware that existence would come to an end. And historians and anthropologists, theologists, and psychologists have all pondered the question of how the awareness of our mortality has influenced our lives, our beliefs, and our own morality. But if one human had the answers to those questions, what if one man who was born at the dawn of history and the birth of human society, someone who'd seen humanity grow from tribes to countries, from cults to cathedrals, and from superstition to scholarship, if that man could tell us those answers, would we want to hear them? That's the question explored in the 2007 film, The Man from Earth.
What if a man from the upper Paleolithic survived until the present day?
You know what could happen? Yeah, the pancreas turns over cells every 24 hours, the stomach lining in 3 days, the entire body in 7 years, but the process falters. Now, if a quirk in his immune system led to perfect detox, perfect renewal, then yeah, he could duck decay.
We were just talking about a caveman who survives until the present time.
And he hasn't aged a day in 10 years. Every woman on the faculty would give anything to have that secret.
Jeez! Oh! I don't have eyes in the back of my head. I can't hear a flea walking. I am not in any way Superman.
There have always been legends of such a thing, a creature, not quite human, taking not the blood, but the life force itself.
God has spoken through man to make his word clearer.
Begat, foreman of science, completely baffled, my friend. Who do you think I am?
You are absolutely certifiable.
You stand alive and tall in a graveyard that you helped to fill? Well, then perhaps it's time to die.
Ooh.
This film had a very interesting sort of distribution in that it wasn't really distributed commercially the way that you think. But the people that made it basically said, look, we want everybody that we can to see this film. So we're going to just release this on the internet. We're going to upload it to your file sharing services and just encourage everyone who wants to watch this, whether they're at a festival or, you know, they see it on a video site or they're using like a BitTorrent type thing. Go ahead and watch this film. And then if you like it, please, you know, give us a donation, whatever you think that we deserve.
That's what I was trying to... Okay, first of all, the movie was awesome. But while I was watching it, I was trying to figure out, like, because it looked very, you know, budget or whatever.
Yeah.
And, like, it wasn't all there, like, from a craft perspective, for sure, either. But I was looking at it, and I'm like, it doesn't even look like cheaper. It looks cheaper than direct-to-video. You know what I mean? So it's like... what, you know, how or why was this made? And now when you're saying it was like direct to torrent, I'm like,
right.
That's like a whole new like ground, you know, other than like I've seen people like self-release films on like Vimeo, YouTube, stuff like that, but just straight up like we're uploading it to like the Pirate Bay or whatever. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, it had a budget of about $200,000.
That's awesome.
And I'm not sure exactly how that was raised, although I know that Richard Shankman, the director and producer, has done crowdfunded films before. In fact, there's a sequel to this film that maybe we'll talk about later that was also crowdfunded. And so, yeah, I mean, he's a talented director. I mean, he's definitely worked on professional films before. I think this is a labor of love for him and, of course, for the Bixby family. And so, you know, when you've got $200,000 and you have to shoot it all in one place, you kind of accomplish what you can. But I think it's very, very competently made with those limitations in mind.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I wasn't surprised to find out that it was later adapted into a stage play. And I think that it would work really great as a stage play. I think that the film reads like a play and with the play's dialogue.
It also, it did. And it also kind of reminded me of, because, you know, it's a sci-fi author. It reminded me of a lot of old sci-fi stories where sometimes it's like the premise is so quaint or like simple that's basically what the whole story is. And that's like 75% of this is like just people going like, what if there was a caveman who lived forever, you know?
Yeah.
And them like just kind of like talking it out. And that also is why it reminded me of like kind of an old story where like someone, or even just like reminded me of our last episode, Amelas, where it's just like imagine this place, you know what I mean? And they're just kind of like describing a thing. Obviously this adds in some like even more character and stuff like that. Like the characters do have their own things, but a lot of the story is just like them like going through it and sort of describing a thing. And it's like, dang, that's crazy.
Yeah. And you know, there are a lot of talented actors in the film, surprisingly, and I don't think there's any real connection, but there's a lot of actors who have been involved in Star Trek that appear in the film. Of course, the Candyman himself, Tony Todd, is in it. The main character, played by David Lee Smith, was in an episode of Voyager. John Billingsley, of course, a regular on Enterprise, is in it as well. Mm-hmm. And Richard Riehle, who is a character actor who... I write about Richard Riehle so much that my phone autocorrect knows Richard Riehle. He has a interestingly spelled last name, but my phone's like, oh, you're talking about Richard Riehle. He's been on Star Trek. Yeah, he's been on Star Trek a couple of times. And William Catt, who's kind of, he played the greatest American hero. He's in Carrie, sort of like a B-movie, nerd movie actor, are all in this. And they all do a really great job with this kind of very academic dialogue. You know, it doesn't exactly like flow super smoothly, but they really they do their best to make you believe that this really is, like you said, just a pitch where, and in the movie it's literally a pitch. Like this guy is at first kind of pitching them on this idea that there was a man. What if a man lived all these years? And so it's like a bunch of academics just sort of sitting down and, you know, around a fire and just sort of like pitching, you know, their ideas or their theories about what this man would experience and how he might influence human society. And so it doesn't, you know, at first when I started watching this, I thought like, oh, how is this going to be clunky? Because it's going to read like, first, you know, the look of it is sort of like one of those like B movies or Cinemax movies about a bunch of middle-aged people who get together for a weekend and they're going to learn about themselves. You know, the director rented a cabin for this thing.
Yeah.
But it soon like really sucks you in. You know, it isn't just a script where the writer's going to show you all the books that he read, you know, about different topics. Like the actors do a great job of like making it come alive and each kind of representing their own viewpoint and how much they are accepting or totally rejecting what John Oldman is proposing here. I thought that was really neat. Although I do resent that the biologist acts like a total asshole. Everybody else is like, oh yes, history, archaeology, and the biologist is like, well, I don't know what's going on. Hey,
I did like that they all kind of had their own, you know, they were all pretty unique in their ways, and he kind of played that like asshole part pretty well. So
Yes. As a former student of pre-med biology, I'm a little upset about that. But it is the great John Billingsley playing that role.
Yeah. I think
I also
the
liked...
writing was just really strong, and that kept it together. And then you mentioned the actors, and I was not sure. Like you said, he's a talented director, but I guess I've only seen the 2 Man from Earth movies, and like based on this and the sequel, I was like, I don't know about the director.
Oh yeah,
because like obviously the sequel wasn't written by the same guy, and the actors were different, and I kind of thought the sequel sucked. But yeah.
I think in terms of directing, you are definitely, because it was shot in about 8 days on $200,000, and so you're limited by just by logistics. You're limited by the time that you have. You're limited by how many people you have in the crew.
Mm-hmm.
It
that
really stood out
for this movie, though.
Oh, for the first
like
one, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is like a one-room sort of drama. But I was watching the second one as well, and there's a scene where it's not really important, but there's a scene where the character Art is riding in a car with some kids, and they're all sort of talking about this guy John, the guy that they're going to see, and it just was like, it's just shot through the windshield like the way you do it, and they kind of give their lines, and there's a little bit of coverage, and then it's over. And I thought, in like $1 million or a $5 million movie, you would have establishing shots of the car. You would maybe do shots of the car in motion, not just, being rocked back and forth on a set. You would shoot through the side window, because there's a part where Art is getting kind of thoughtful, and it's like, I think a director would sort of take, just a different angle, like focus in on him. But there's only so much you can do when you've got so much time and people to make the movie. So
and just
taking that into account, I thought that it was pretty well made.
I thought some of the choices in the sequel were like, the whole time I was thinking like, oh, it should be more about his friend who wrote the book. But then like nothing happens with him really. And instead it's about these like annoying students.
Right. Yeah.
And like, I don't know, Michael Dorn should have been in it more, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. I have some notes for the second movie, but let's save that for our discussion of the second movie. I did like, so there's like 5 or 6 different characters here, and they all come from different scientific disciplines. And also, I think there is a attempt by the writer to distinguish them a bit in terms of personality. And I think that's all well and good, but I think that there are things that I would pare out if I was going to adapt this. I would just sort of because I think as the movie goes on, the first like 10, 15 minutes of the movie, I'm like I said before, like, okay, this is like a cable movie drama. But when they start to get into applying their fields to John's experiences, I think that just the natural sort of vibe that the actors all bring to their roles and their responses, which are centered around their own scientific disciplines and beliefs, really take over. So at the beginning, like, William Catt shows up on a motorcycle. He's got a leather jacket on, and he's, got a young student with him, and you get an idea of who this guy is. Yes, but that nothing really happens with that, and it doesn't really go anywhere. And I'm not saying it's like a bad characterization. We get the idea that he's sort of like a, rock star, history professor or whatever, but it doesn't really like do anything for the character. And he becomes more interesting in the fact that he's just really like kind of offended that John is telling them all this. And I also wonder, like, the addition of the student, I probably would have just cut the student, because like, why is she there? Like, what's the point? Like, what does she think? All these people know this guy. They know he's a little weird, but he likes talking about history. And then this guy brings this like 20-year-old student, and she's just like, I'm just here to like blow this guy and get an A. Like, what is going on? They're talking about this guy living forever. I thought that like it didn't exactly fit, in the same way that I didn't think that it was an interesting reveal, but having Richard Rieele's character realize just smack dab at the end of the film that he is the son of John, and then have a heart attack and die right there, and then John still like drives off. It's an interesting thing that doesn't really add anything, and so I probably would have just cut that, because it's like whether he stays or goes, like that's kind of what he's thinking about, and adding this, it adds like it adds a little. It's a third act reveal that comes so late that it doesn't help us understand John's motivations or his intentions, other than just he's going to leave no matter what.
Yeah, I would say that second thing too, the reveal that he's his dad. It's an interesting idea. I just think it's like not executed that well. It does feel like it just sneaks up on you, and maybe that's supposed to be that shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, it does sort of like, I like the idea that guy, he kind of went through a lot with his wife, and then like this just like put him over the edge, and that like gave him a heart attack or whatever. But it just, I don't know. And also because it came alongside, like, I like the name, the old man thing is kind of cute. I like that. And you kind of can pick up on that, like, before they reveal it, because it's, it's pretty obvious, but it's fun. But then when he starts getting into more of the nicknames and stuff like that, it's like, okay, this is a little too cute.
Yeah.
Which was, again, something in the second movie they really wanted to show you all these fun nicknames, and I'm like, So I kind of agree with that. And then like the student thing, I think it's kind of an interesting characterization. It feels kind of realistic. That in this group of teachers there'd be one who's like dating his student or whatever. But I do agree, like the student, like what was interesting about it was how each of the professors applied their sort of field to it, and maybe you could add something interesting where the students may be a bit more like open-minded about it or whatever, but which she kind of was, or she was kind of like just like along for the ride, I guess that's kind of it, but it didn't really, I don't know, it didn't add too much.
With the psychologist, I like the fact that he came late, and he sort of, because he kind of, when he comes in and he is now, the psychology is a soft science. He's really talking more about John as a person and why he would say this and what his life must have been like and how he reacts to it. That was all interesting. But they have this thing about his wife, and they just sort of mention it, and it happens off screen. Like, why not take the fact that he maybe make it that he suspects that Oldman is his father, have that be his motivation for wanting a connection or venting his frustration or something like that.
Or they could have built that up throughout the movie.
Yeah. One of my criticisms would be that like none of these characters really exist before they show up. Do you know what I mean? You don't get the sense that we're kind of coming in the middle here for a guy who's literally leaving his job. They all sort of come in and say like, oh boy, all the girls love you at the school, or remember that time that we did this. It's that kind of writing where it's like, yeah, you're trying to set things up, but the best way to do that would probably be to have those things come out over the course of the thing. But of course that would get in the way of them examining this problem, which is really what we're here for. If, going back to Omelas, if Ursula Le Guin did tell you whether there was an orgy or not, or she did go into great explanation about the technology and the clothes that the people wore, it would have made Omelas worse. But she knew that, and so she's just like, don't worry about that. You're here for the juice. The juice is there's a kid in the basement. And the juice of this is these very smart people are going to do their best to shoot as many holes as possible in this weird theory this guy's bringing to them.
I'm pretty much with you. Like, I think it should be more of the function of like them applying their fields with like the character sprinkled in. Like there definitely should be character. It shouldn't just be like a bunch of people in like suits sitting at a table like logicking it out. But I like those things that come up. Like I liked later with the one teacher like questioning her faith or like questioning him. That was kind of fun stuff. I think that should be in there, but I think they could have gotten that. It's kind of like a good action movie, gets the characterization like in between the action, and it doesn't like completely halt the movie to like talk to you about how the character feels all the time.
Yeah, like characters are often defined by what they do rather than what they say, and in a movie where people are only going to say things, it becomes a little difficult. But there are like actions that characters take in the film that express their character that I thought were really great. The asshole biologist is like kind of being a prick because there's the one woman who, is a devout Christian. She has a strong faith, and she's got a real problem with this idea of this guy. And so she gets into kind of a tiff with the biologist guy, but then later on he's like, "Oh, you're cold. Come sit by the fire. Sit by me over here." It's like a no hard feelings thing. It's like we can have these, at least for him, like we can have these philosophical and scientific debates. But like I'm not, I act like an asshole, but I care about all the people here.
Or like Tony Todd's like the most fascinated by it, and I really liked him kind of getting swept up in it. That really worked for his character.
Yeah, he's such a good actor, and he's such an interesting actor because he's like this huge, big, sometimes scary guy, and he often plays these scary roles, but yet he's so you can really see the wheels turning in his head, and he can bring such an emotional intensity to what he does, which we of course see in the DS9 episode The Visitor.
Yeah, where he plays an author,
old Jake. Yeah, he plays an author. Yeah.
He is really good at the soft roles. I think he's like definitely underrated.
Yeah. The character of John does this. He says that he's only done this one time before. Apparently, he met some other man that he thought was immortal and sort of shared this with him. So he's never really done this before. And so I guess we have to kind of wonder, because it never really is settled in the film, why he is doing this, why he gets all these people together and decides to sort of float this and basically confess to them, other than the fact that we need a movie here. Like what, why is he really doing this?
Well, I think it's a theme I think they got into more in the second one, but the idea of like no matter how long you live or whatever, you do, you age, whether it's emotionally or whatever. And I think maybe he was hitting a point in his life where, I don't know, like maybe he had sort of like become exhausted by it all. That's kind of how at least he carried himself in the movie. You know what I mean? He seemed like sort of tired. And then that's something that was in the second one, is that, he sort of was giving into that. So I thought that was a clever choice for the sequel. And I thought it was playing off kind of not a theme of that movie, but something that I felt like the actor was bringing to it,
Yeah. I also think, a lot of the film, maybe outside of just the 14,000-year-old man, like talking to these people, like I think another goal of the film or focus of the film is like this epistemological idea of, what is it to have knowledge? Like, what's knowledge good for? Why do we have it? How do you collect it? And they end up having this kind of this sort of dialogue, like about Socratic dialogue, if you will, about like what they're, what is it to have knowledge? Like he talks about how, yes, I've been alive for 14,000 years, but I didn't really understand how to make my thoughts known until we developed as humans, like these ideas, So like I knew, like they asked me like, oh, where are you from? What country are you from? I don't know. We didn't have countries. I just knew that I was from the plains or from this area. And then I found a lake, and I didn't have anything to call these things. And it wasn't until we developed knowledge that developed the ability to study and gain more knowledge. And so, yeah, maybe you're right about how maybe in his evolution as a being, he has reached a point where he feels like he knows too much or he'll never know enough. And he has this collection of friends, because he's an academic, who can maybe in their own way tell him what he's there for. Maybe he's searching for, meaning. Like maybe they can help explain why this is happening, like what he's for, what he's doing. I just thought that was really interesting. Of course, they are, they're all imperfect beings, but they are possibly less perfect than he is because they are not able to understand. And it does really reflect. It's funny because we'll talk about the second. I guess we've both seen the sequel, so we'll talk about it later. But Christianity takes a beating in both of these movies. But I do think that Bixby is aware of the parallels between the figure of Christ or the figure of Buddha or any sort of messianic figure, and a figure like John. You know, John is literally coming into his own here. Like, he's coming to academics, and they are receiving him not. They are not. They're rejecting fully. As men and women of science, they are rejecting what he's telling them because they cannot. It's blowing their minds. And you can definitely see that from a religious point of view. I'm here to tell you that everything's wrong, but here's the way to go. He's telling them that their religion, like what they know, science, is wrong about some things. And they take it in a lot of different ways. And you've got a character who's, sort of the Judas in a way. He's going to pull a gun on him. You got a character who's like completely rejecting this, but then sort of comes back at the end like a doubting Thomas. And I think all the parallels to the Gospels are right there.
Definitely. And I like what you're saying about, like, they talk about it, but like trying to describe, where you're from, or like how you feel, or even like just in term back to like why he would tell them now, like the idea of like even understanding what's happening to you, like he talks about that, like everyone's dying, but I don't, and like he like at that time, like he doesn't have like anywhere near the resources to have like how John Billingsley is, how he could tell you all about, the human body and what that does, or, aging, like at that time, it's like, you don't even have contact to other people, outside of like your tribe or whatever. So like, do you know, am I the only person like me? That sort of thing. And I also maybe think like there's two reasons of maybe why he would talk about it then. Is one, like, you might feel like, okay, like we have a lot of understanding about what's happening to me, like maybe I can finally get this across to people, and he can't. But also it might just be like living a life like that, you probably go through so many different stages, like that beginning time of not knowing what's going on, to like event, like, it almost be like a Groundhog Day, where there's the part where he's like, ooh, this is great, I can learn how to play piano. But then like eventually you'd settled into, or like get into spirituality or be inspired by the Buddha, and then maybe even think, oh, I can help people, and then be rejected, and then spend like centuries, figuring out what do I do, and like maybe it's just it's probably that like combination of like, I can maybe communicate with these people, but also like look at what's happened with humanity over all these years, like, like maybe some sort of exhaustion with centered around that,
Yeah, he's a person who has lived all these years, and he doesn't really get into, they make the requisite joke about him being a vampire, and often vampire stories, if they're not, if you're just not like a completely devilish, demonic, evil figure, vampire stories tend to go into like, it's so hard to live these lives and to love people, and they die. And I think Bixby very smartly just kind of chucks all that. Like, it's like, that's not really what we're here to talk about. We're not super interested in him feeling loss and regret for all these years. Like, he's just more completely focused on the intellectual. And so if you're just from a practical viewpoint, if you're a person who sees people, live and die, sees societies rise and fall, but develop slowly towards a higher level, and also see religions come and go, and maybe start a couple yourself, you'd start to think of yourself as like either being completely like a separate species, or being somehow like a representative of the species. You know what I mean? And so without anybody to answer to, without a higher power that he's seen himself, I don't think he feels like he rules these people, but he is like, no, I got to like figure out what it's all about, because, I've seen people kill each other over, grain or hunting grounds, and I've seen people kill each other over, abortion rights or something like that. So it's like, if we're going to learn this much and get this far, I need to like figure out like why is this happening? Like, what are we doing this for? Because you grow up and you die after, 80 or 90 years, and think you're going to your reward, or believe that there's nothing there, or believe that you're going to enter a new karmic cycle. And I don't have that. I'll never get any of that. So like, what is it that I am really here for? I thought it was fascinating that he's talking to these academics and intellectuals, and they're sort of chagrined that he tells them that he's had like 10 doctorates over the course of his life. And that's just, what we think of as modern academic knowledge. But even his like biology degree, he got 150 years ago. So it's not.
And he can't just study that constantly.
It's not even up to date. Yeah. So it's like, it almost gives like a lie to the importance of learning things. Even the knowledge that we have will be superseded. And to be fair, the other academics, they all accede to that. They're all like, yeah, obviously, in 100 years, I won't know. I won't be the guy that knows everything either, but it's got to be tough for somebody like him to keep picking up these new philosophies and these new wisdoms and then see them be superseded by other things.
Yeah. And don't you think too, at this point, he's got to feel like there's kind of like a ticking clock on humanity right now, so maybe there's sort of that appeal, I've tried to talk to people again, but like now there's maybe not even that much time left on this planet. So like maybe I gotta like try to reach out to someone,
Yeah, and it really brings up the question then of, other than we need a movie here, like why tell this story now? Why is he doing this now? And this really connects to the second film as well, which I guess we should start to bring that discussion in. But like, why is this the point? Why is this the fullness of time? Why is this where we join the story? And jumping all the way to the end of the second film, the John Billingsley's character, makes the point that, we are leaving the era that came before the Holocene, and we're entering the Anthropocene, a era that is not necessarily approved fully by scientists, but has been proposed, that we're entering a new era where the history of Earth is being affected and charted by what humans are doing to it. That, we as a civilized and industrialized society has changed Earth so much that going forward, as long as we're around, it will be defined by what we have done to it. Whereas previously the Holocene is just kind of thought of as, the end of the last ice age and really the beginning of civilization as we know it. And it coincides with the realization by John that maybe his body is changing and that he is not necessarily maybe he is the man of the Holocene who will not be following us into the Anthropocene.
Yeah, I like that. Like that, even like he will get left behind as well by time, much like his colleagues. But for him, it just took so much longer.
Yeah. He drops a big bomb on everybody. Hey, I'm Jesus. Now let me explain. I didn't want to tell you this because I knew it was going to blow your minds. But yeah, actually, I was Jesus.
That had to have come he had to have thought that would happen.
Yeah, I think that the movie does a good job of like kind of suggesting that people are like, is something coming here? Like, is something big gonna come out? And I like how the movie approaches it. I think that it is, I don't think that I would be wrong in assuming that Jerome Bixby probably wasn't a devout worshiper of any deity, but I like the fact that it doesn't really insult or assault belief in something. In fact, the movie sort of makes it clear that John was just trying to spread positive thought, and he had he'd studied under the Buddha, and he's like, this guy's got some good ideas. Let's be nice. Let's be nice to each other. Let's try to better ourselves. And it sort of evolved into this other thing. And he doesn't really get into it much, but you have to imagine that every time he sees something terrible happen, in the name of religion, he must feel kind of responsible for it. Yeah,
I think they maybe mentioned that once or twice or something, but yeah, they didn't focus on like how he takes things, that much, I guess.
Yeah.
But that was like a big, it was a pretty like they got to the reveal really well, because like when someone first asks it, like that's kind of where it's like almost amazing they didn't suggest it first, because you think of like, oh yeah, he like, I don't know, that's where I first went, was like, well, he can like, he doesn't die, you know, who didn't die in the Bible. that was like immediately what I thought of. But maybe this has been done a lot in stuff, but I also think it plays on, that's like a talking point. A lot of people talk about how you know, Christian practices and beliefs like are coincidentally a lot like this, or like the story of Jesus is a lot like this. And it's like, I like how this is like, well, yeah, what if it's because they're like, the similarities between Buddhism and Christianity are like literally linked by the same guy, you know?
Sure.
I kind of like that. But I feel like that's probably that's done in every, you know, movie where there's like an ancient monster and they're like some people called him this, some called him this, you know. I guess that's been done, right. But it was pretty clever in this.
And it doesn't read to me, I think it's the skill of the writing and also the skill of the actors that it doesn't read to me like some Da Vinci Code Dan Brown-esque thing where he just read a book about the Merovingians or something like that. And so he's just going to have his main character just basically read off paragraphs from these books with theories or facts. Like they do make it personal. And I think that the actor playing John does a good job of kind of keeping it, you know, I talked about how I think another script or another actor would want a scene where he does yell and scream about how bad he feels about the Crusades or something like that. But you can imagine in your mind that a guy who's been around so long and since then has endured probably worse than that and has developed all kinds of coping mechanisms, you know, and also just doesn't think about it much because there's just other stuff. Like how many memories, how many experiences can a human brain hold and control? Like how well does he remember everything that happened? You know, if you think about like, you know, what you have, somebody in the movie says like, where were you like, you know, a year ago today? Like, can you remember, like, what'd you have for lunch? It wasn't important, obviously, so you don't remember. So maybe he doesn't remember every single thing that happened, but
right. Yeah.
There are certain things that have kind of stuck with him.
And you're right. The actor does, like, they don't go into it much, like I said, but I do agree the actor like really sells you on like that there's something inside him that he is feeling, you know, that he's almost holding back from them a little bit too, you know.
Yeah, you get that sense. Although like having like a chiseled, you know, white guy who's kind of circumspect play Jesus or this figure is like, all right, it's a little on the nose. Like I don't, why couldn't Billingsley be the man from Earth?
Just like some silly looking guy.
Yeah, and the humor is his coping mechanism. Well, speaking of Billingsley and the Man from Earth, we should probably talk about the Man from Earth Holocene because we both watched it for no good reason except for completionism and also just to see where the story goes.
They do it well. Speaking of where the story goes, and you named this, but it feels like by the end of this, they are going Da Vinci Code.
Yes,
it gets there, and like it's very much like it's like a thriller, and I'm like,
it is more like that, and they've got a Nick Fury scene at the end, just to set up a third film. Of course, on the copy that I watched, the writer / director comes on at the end and says, "Kind of seemed like we were going for a sequel, huh? Well, we are. So give to our charity." To develop a sequel. So we'll have to see if that happens. Well, yeah, I'd watch it too.
If they actually get the guy, like, we got to get the guys back, you know. They had John Billingsley, and that was one of the best scenes in the movie. Basically, all the scenes with the old dudes were the best parts of the movie.
Yeah.
And we just got to cut these teens out. Or not even teens, these college kids.
Yeah, I didn't hate the college kids. I think that is really sort of the opposite of what the first movie was. The first movie is older people who are very learned and responsible with knowledge. And then the other side of that is like a bunch of teens who think they know everything and are learning about this stuff and aren't respectful of the implications of it. I think that's a good concept.
Yeah,
I just think that we needed some a better dialogue and maybe more experienced actors.
I think there's something also too, like we were talking about like the eras like passing you by, and there's something it adds sort of to this like impending sense of doom of like humanity, that it's like because of like technology is not only like destroying the globe or whatever, like the way we use it, at least like the industrial aspect, but technology is also like is going to now it's essentially going to end him, because like now cameras are everywhere,
Yeah.
and there's something about having kids of like a younger generation who are more comfortable with that sort of technology, like being a part of it. It does approach on sometimes it being like the kids are always on their damn phones or whatever.
Yeah.
But
TikTok killed Jesus. That's what we're going with.
I do still think that's like the idea that like you've got a camera everywhere, like they don't really go into it much, but it is part of the film for sure.
Yeah, I think that is implicit, but not necessarily really explicit, and I think that's good. So again, it's more of just a cable movie meets slice of life writing. There's a lot of like hanging threads, and there's things that I would just cut because you don't really need. And one of them would be, I like Vanessa Williams, but I would have just cut Vanessa Williams. Like I'm sure having her on board was part of getting the whole thing made. And I think that she's been in, she's a friend of Shankman and has been in some of his films before. So it's good to see her, but that character just doesn't really help us do anything. If John had moved on into a new life and just decided that he wasn't going to have a girlfriend for a while, I think that probably would have worked out okay.
I would have probably referenced the girl in the last movie or something.
Yeah, because she apparently goes with him, but then we don't see her. So is she in a ditch somewhere? And then having like William Catt come back as Art Jenkins, I would have brought him back earlier. Like they never even meet. If this is a second chapter of a 3-act thing where in the third film there's a confrontation, that would have been fine. But to have him kind of be around, but not really influence anything was a weird choice.
My thinking is it should have been one kid, and then part of it should have revolved around Michael Dorn, and like he could be going through a similar thing of like, oh, my friend, like I thought I knew him type thing. That could have been an element. And then having his ex-colleague and like seeing how that, like I was really interested, his character seemed really interesting, to me. And even like I like the little details of like the pet pig and stuff, it totally didn't matter, but I was like, okay. But like, the idea too of like being like this person who told him before, like it kind of inspiring, like how it ruined his life or whatever. There could have been something to that, because they could also have been like talked about like, well, you wrote the book, it could have been a some kind of story there, but I don't know.
I would have cut slutty girl, and that's the film's really characterization of her. That's not me saying that.
I think
because I don't feel like there was any point to that, and I probably would have cut comedy guy. I would have had just like two kids, because honestly, like the one girl who seems like she's just pursuing this because she's interested, and then at the end it sort of turns and she's like, you're Jesus, tell us what to do. That was kind of interesting. And when the Christian kid, who is maybe a repressed homosexual, gets the guy in the basement, I thought like, okay, this is kind of the scene that you expect from like a Billy Graham Productions movie. But it actually turned out to be one of my favorite scenes. Like I liked their intellectual debate. Like he's the Pontius Pilate here, like this is old man on trial against these sort of the modern idea of Christianity, and like what this kid's like, what should I do about this?
Yeah, it definitely was a little schlocky or whatever, but I liked it. That was cool. He stabbed him a little over the top. Yeah. But part of it though too with them is like they were sort of some of them were going through like him with this crisis of faith. It was just a more extreme version of the woman in the first movie, And so with that I was kind of like, okay, like it's kind of covering the same thing. And then I guess by the end it went a little over the top, but I was like, not that interested in this story because I felt like I had seen it, which is why I felt like seeing more of how it was affecting the people personally who we've already seen like deal with this stuff. That was what was more interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still that sort of subtle commentary, like you mentioned, though, about how not only does the internet make it tougher for John to do what he does, which is sort of disappear every few years, but also the internet has radicalized a lot of people. It's shared a lot of information, like they can get a hold of this art guy, they can research the topics they're looking for, but maybe the older Christian, like just assuming that like she's a Catholic or something like that, she doesn't like the idea of this guy saying he's Jesus. But then this younger kid who goes to like this evangelical church is like, I better kill this guy. That's what I'm going to do. Like the idea that like all of our, sure, humans have done bad things and they've believed all kinds of things over the course of the Holocene, but like now like the needle's going way up. Like we've intensified all of our beliefs and actions about all kinds of things.
It does kind of add to like one part of his character is that he's older and much wiser than a lot of people, but he also can't keep up with certain things. Though he can kind of, this is maybe something I don't like, but he can kind of keep up with the younger generation and that like everyone thinks he's cool. You know what I mean? Like all the kids think he's so cool. I think it would be better actually, because part of it is like how this type of person's being left behind, lost to an era, is that like there's no amount of knowledge he could gain where he could outsmart like what's coming around the corner with like the technology or something, and that's shown off really well. I do like how they show the kids like Googling him and looking him up, and it's like that's totally something I could do now. You know what I mean? If like like my coworker, I just wanted to like figure out what their deal was, I could just like Google their name, find their Facebook and all these photos and information, whether, and sometimes it's like whether you want it to be or not, because you have kids who want to take a picture of you with your Frappuccino or whatever. And so I do like that aspect of like he can't outsmart, what's coming.
Yeah. And there's no real like moral judgment placed on it necessarily. Obviously, tasing a guy, tying him up and then like stabbing him is not a good thing. But it's not like the film is saying that this technology is bad, or that like we're wielding it poorly necessarily. It's in the old days, it would be very hard to determine that John was or was not who he said he was. Now it's easier, and it isn't like a good or a bad thing. It's just bad for John specifically.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it could be.
The movie could have been really moralizing about, for a movie where a Christian character ties a guy up and stabs him and calls him the Antichrist, it's a lot less moralizing than you'd think it'd be.
Well, I think it does moralize it a little bit in that it is like, it does show like it affects him negatively, but I think it's kind of a metaphor a little bit. But I think it's like I don't know. It's not just like because of that existing, it's sort of like the way it can be used, I guess. I don't know how to express this, but I feel like it definitely is a commentary on it, but it doesn't like jump out at you like it's someone being like, hey man, aren't phones bad? I guess that's
right. Yeah. But it's also just the existence of phones and what we have. Not only are we moving, what is an era? What is the Holocene? Like, does it describe something about Earth, the fact that there are or aren't glaciers, or does it describe something about humanity and the way that we exist with each other? And if we are moving from the Holocene into the Anthropocene, it's not just our world, which is heating up, but it's also just the retention of information and our access to it and the informational space that we live in as well. In that new era, a man like John can't live the same way that he used to. And unlike the character that we should be talking about, he doesn't have access to spaceships that can take him somewhere else.
Yeah, it's more about like, can he deal with this too? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he's the ultimate throwback. We will continue talking about this for sure, but let's bring Star Trek into the equation. But first, we'll take a break for a word from our sponsors. We'll be back with more Backtrekking.
Hi, I'm Mikan Hana.
And I'm Caliban.
And we're the hosts of the Sailor Noob podcast. I'm the expert.
And I'm the noob.
You're talking into the wrong end of the microphone.
Aye, aye.
Okay, every week we watch a new episode of Sailor Moon and learn about monsters, fashion, food, culture, and of course, the sailor warrior of love and justice, Sailor Moon.
All right, now, what is her rank? Is she an admiral or a rear admiral?
Okay, shh. The ad's almost over. We're a couple of magical people, and every week we Moon Prism Power make up a new episode.
Steady as she goes.
Please stop that. Sailor Noob is available every Friday on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Shiver me timbers. All right, we're back. It's time to talk about the Trek side of this equation. The humans that we see in Star Trek's future are cultured and learned and peaceful, enjoying the fruits of humanity's victory over its long struggle with its darker natures and its unsophisticated origins. Though their travels take them farther from Earth, they still remember and treasure the arts, science, and culture that helped them reach the stars in the first place. Around one of those stars orbits a planet, and on that planet lives a man who, if he can be believed, is responsible for much of that art, science, and culture, a man of almost immeasurable accomplishments, a man that has lived for over 6,000 years and has yet to find a solution to humanity's greatest and oldest need, companionship. When Flint faces not only his death, but the death of his dreams of happiness, Kirk and crew can only provide a Requiem for Methuselah.
If you do not leave voluntarily, I have the power to force you to leave or kill you where you stand.
Have you ever seen a victim of Virgilian fever? They die in one day. The effects are like bubonic plague.
The Enterprise, a plague ship. A last tender encounter, Captain Kirk. Be thankful that you did not attack me, Captain. I might have accepted battle, and I have twice your physical strength. How childish he is, Raina. Would you call him brave? Or a fool?
I will not be the cause of this. I choose.
My crew. Time for you to join your crew.
This made me remember that the other thing I thought of while watching both of these things is Assassin's Creed.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, and there's sort of like, there's a risk you run of doing this type of story of like wanting it to be historical, but also like, what a coincidence that you knew every famous person in history. And I think they pick their spots pretty wisely. Like the Buddha Jesus connection is good in the movie. And like the Van Gogh is also a good, that's kind of a good figure because there's sort of a tragic sort of also thing with him.
The Columbus thing is okay because he talks about, once people are able to travel places that he wants to do that, so I can see him like going to the edge of the Atlantic Ocean and being like, maybe there's something on the other side of that. And this Columbus guy is going to go there, but then also being like, I'm afraid, though. Like, are there sea monsters out there? I don't know. So maybe I'm not going to do that and just stay in Europe for a while. There's also the thing, too, and I think this is a reason that Star Trek has not returned to the character of Flint or someone like him, is that when you have a guy who was Brahms and was Da Vinci and was Hannibal and all these people, it becomes like not the story of the human race, but the story of this guy.
Yeah.
And like Star Trek has always been about the fact that humanity, if they can just get their shit together, will be really great. And we have a destiny, amongst the stars. But like, if you've also got a guy who was kind of secretly helping us the entire time, then it's kind of like the story of Flint and humanity. And for all the things that they have pulled from older Star Trek shows and concepts to reuse with new Star Trek, they've never really touched on Flint at this date in broadcast. Perhaps we'll see Strange New Worlds season 2. Who knows? But I think the reason is because it's like, it's kind of a weird, uncomfortable thing. And, you know, they were present, or they were conscious of that in the 60s when they broadcast this, because apparently originally in Bixby's script, he wanted Flint to be Jesus and Moses and Beethoven and Pablo Picasso. And NBC's Standard and Practices said, he's not Jesus or Moses. We're not going to do that. Also, we don't want him to be Picasso, because Picasso was, of course, alive at the time that they made this episode.
Oh my gosh.
And so we don't want to do a thing where he is, we're depicting a living person. That could get thorny. Although, ironically, there is one, I can't remember the name now, but there is a painting that they attribute to a painter who was actually a painter and like a husband of somebody who worked on the production or something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So I don't know if they were just trying to say, oh, this guy's really good and he'll be remembered, 400 years from now.
It's a little plug.
Yeah, they're just plugging this guy's paintings. But I do think that it's interesting that they haven't returned to that. I also think it's interesting that, you know, you were talking about the sort of cute puns that they do with the names. I never understood his name Flint until I watched The Man from Earth and was like, of course, Flint is like the first tool that humanity made. His name is atavistic, and I got it when Tony Todd was looking at like the arrowhead or whatever, that the spearhead that John held or had in his house. And I was like, oh, Flint, I get it. That's why he's Flint.
Yeah, it's a little, it sort of reminds me of like the beginning of 2001, where it's just like, it places all of this weight upon like a simple invention, you know, that altered our history, you know.
I don't want his name to be Bone. What about Flint? Yeah.
Could have been Club.
Yeah.
No, Flint, it's a cool, it's just a
Mr.
good
Club.
name too, you know, Flint.
Yeah, it also sort of, you know, he's a kind of flinty guy, sort of describes him as well. I think it's interesting, you know, we were talking about the idea in The Man from Earth that maybe humanity is moving into a new phase, and whether or not the planet recognizes that, it seems like our man, you know, our character John is also sort of moving out of the sphere of influence here. And we don't know why that is. Maybe the third film will explore that. But in this episode, Flint is also passing away. And again, it's at this fullness of time. Why is this happening now when he is discovered by the Enterprise on this planet? And McCoy gives us the answer that it's, you know, leaving Earth ultimately is what did it. He doesn't understand what it is. Possibly he says the fields, a nice 60s sci-fi pseudoscientific word, the fields of Earth, or perhaps like, you know, pollution or something like that. I think that's also, there's a suggestion that possibly John is changing or different because of, you know, the way that the Earth has changed since antiquity. And so you get the same idea that there is something vital about Earth, or at least the Earth in which he was created or was born, that is vital to his longevity, and that is now passing away.
It sort of makes you think of like something that I was reminded of when we watched like Aniara, which is like the idea of being like taken away from your natural habitat, you know, being like alienated from what you know as your existence, you know, can kind of like make you go crazy.
You know, and it's an interesting topic to explore in art. You know, it's easy for boomers to say, wow, you know, the video games and the internet have ruined this generation. You know, they are bemoaning a change which has happened to every generation since we had generations. You know, everybody looks at the future and says, I don't know. But it is sort of made explicit in a story like Aniara. Hey, boomers, did you write a 125 stanza poem about leaving the environs that we knew for new things? It's an interesting idea to try to tell a story about it in Star Trek as well, because Star Trek is all about going to the future. But I've got my doubts about that, because certainly isn't TOS about leaving your neighborhood and going, oh boy, it's rough out here. You know, isn't our neighborhood better? Isn't it good that we're bringing democracy to the stars? And I think Star Trek has always kind of secretly been about that. And so it's interesting that you bring up something like Aniara, which I think is a meditation on a meditation on loss, and it's a meditation on things passing away, and not necessarily saying that's bad, but definitely saying that that's something that that humanity has to get used to, because it's going to happen to us.
And that works with Star Trek too, because the people in it, like they've presumably fixed, climate change and stuff like that. So you kind of get this idea that they come from an enriching, thriving planet, Earth. And so that's why they can go and poo-poo other places,
I suppose.
So I don't know. I would say, even though they're traveling out, they aren't disconnected from nature, There's technology, but we have protected the globe, I hope.
Yeah, I think that Star Trek has always elided over the political question, which is, what's right, what's wrong. It's tried to, TOS especially tried to depict a, Kennedy-esque Camelot liberalism in space, which some people might agree with, some people wouldn't. And just by saying, well, we all got together. And it's like, okay, but are you all conservative or liberal? What's your world look like? And a little bit of it is the Le Guin-esque, that's whatever you want. But, as debate online increases, as we enter that informational Anthropocene period where everything is sort of heightened and people want answers, and I think Star Trek is going to have to come down one way or the other. And I think new Star Trek, that is Star Trek, post-Discovery, is trying to elucidate the idea that, it's like the first episode of Strange New Worlds. It planted a flag deeply that, we've got problems and there is a solution to those problems. And yet at the same time, I think Star Trek has continued to resist just saying, we need to get rid of money. We need to get rid of capitalism. You don't think that there's some guy that Jeff Bezos is his head's in a jar somewhere in the 24th century, do you? Of course that's not what's going on. But yet as a product created by a corporation, it can never really do that. And
right.
So we'll never really get the answers that we want. And the franchise will have to continue to just go yada, yada, yada. They've got it all figured out.
Well, and they're eventually going to get to write their way out of it, because we're approaching in real time the years where the things that influence these changes began, and eventually they're going to have to be well, we're past that now. They're going to have to they get to come up with a new canon, you know what I mean? They're going to retcon stuff here and there, and so they can maybe just they can always just keep in a very classic way, just keep moving the goalpost until, everything's over.
Yeah, it's one of those things, Star Trek is increasingly an alternate future and an alternate past as well. And it's one of those things where we don't have to deal with it necessarily now, but if you've got an ambitious writer producer, if you've got, say, 5 shows on the air with 2 more to come, maybe you take a big swing now. Maybe you create, there's a Kelvin universe. Maybe you create another universe that's our real universe. But Star Trek is an alternate universe. Or maybe you try to change things and you say that Q fucks something up and so World War III doesn't happen, but, Star Trek still sort of develops the way that you want it to. It's weird because no other sci-fi franchise has had to deal with this. Has it? Terminator, maybe, I suppose. They make one of those every 10 years or so. And so they had to sort of rewrite the fact that the bombs didn't fall in the 90s. But Star Trek is in a weird place where they're geez, actual human history is getting in the way of us telling this story.
Yeah.
And it's not Roddenberry's fault, because when he created it, he was I don't know when this takes place. It could be the year 2000. It could be the year 3000. But as the series went on, and then, of course, well, it's kind of his fault because he developed the sequel series, which had to be 100 years later. They had to kind of nail it down in time.
Well, but, then what makes it worse is when they're we're going to go back to 2024. It's you're really planting a flag there, like.
Yeah, well, actually not, because they're not going to make any commentary and not really do anything.
Yeah, no.
There will be a mission to Europa, I guess. We'll have to get that together.
Right. Yeah. Well, Roddenberry did it too, didn't he? He said like Khan was in the 90s.
Well, Khan was in the 90s. Of course, he didn't. No, that's right. That was Space Seed, although he didn't write that.
Well.
And then, of course, there was Assignment Earth, where in the 60s. There were like orbiting nuclear weapons platforms. So, of course, we had the SALT treaties that stopped that from happening, but that was a fear at the time.
Okay, yeah. So they started doing it. I mean, that's just what anything that goes on for so long, it's just gonna be like.
That's why you say a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah, and things are going okay for them.
Then you're all set. And then when your boss sells the company, then you can just say, none of that stuff happened. Here's some new stuff.
Yeah, they had to deal with that for a whole different reason.
Yeah, they have their own Kelvin universe. Yeah, and we're living in it right now. Yeah. Well, let's get back to the episode. An episode that has a lot going on when you think about it.
Yeah, they haven't talked about a major element of it, I feel.
It's got a plague ravaging the Enterprise. It's got a planet, a planet that has the cure, but has a guy who is also Brahms. You've got Spock playing waltzes on the piano. Didn't know he could play the piano. This guy has a robot daughter. He's also got an upside-down nomad, a murderous robot that works for him. There's a lot happening in this thing.
Yeah, and there is like a whole, other story arc with... I forgot her name, but the girl in this.
Reyna,
yeah. So like, and that becomes, I mean, that's just as important actually in the episode.
Yeah.
As much as we compared it to The Man from Earth, like there's this whole different story that's kind of unique. It's almost the opposite, because the one story is about someone grappling with, being long lived, and then this is about someone who's like, younger, or like at least has been held back and is sort of like dealing with like wanting to be free, Yeah,
if it wasn't for the fact that these were both written by the same guy, I'm not sure that we would have picked these to talk about together, because I'm sure we can find a couple different Star Trek episodes that are about a guy who has lived for a long time.
This one really,
or even an episode that is like a debate of ideas between for different scientists.
When he is talking about, all of the people he's known or been, that does like really stand out, and especially like the part where they're like, "Oh, this is Mozart's piano," or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
That is very much like the painting in the movie, though. That really felt the connection, but the episode as a whole, not really.
Yeah, and I would almost say that there's too much going on. Like, it really should be Reyna's story. A story that we get shades of, I guess, in the character of Data in TNG. Somebody who is functionally human, but is still trying to struggle with feelings and where they belong in a society. I definitely, like, if I was... So this is season 3, right? In season 3... there's a lot more romance, so definitely Kirk has to fall in love with a robot he just met. That's a big deal. And then maybe we can have some other weird sort of sci-fi elements to just make it more exciting. But I would have told them, like, let's cut some of this stuff out. Like, we don't need maybe keep the scary robot because it's a sci-fi thing. Flint could just be like a rich, powerful guy. He doesn't have to like be, Jesus or Moses or whatever. Let's actually, get into the character of Reyna and like the different versions of her, like if she, has a blowout but comes back as Reyna 16 or something. Like, there's a lot of like very tantalizing elements that are only just sketched into the margins with everything that's going on.
That element of it too felt like, I don't know, like it was handled okay, but we've already talked about similar stories, like with our Tempest episode. And I guess this is like earlier than we talked about like an Enterprise episode in that, but like this felt like one that I feel like even TOS has had other Tempest like episodes where Kirk, you know, or like even Conscience of the King had that a little bit of like an old guy and he's like doing something with the young girl, and like it's about their relationship, you know, her as like his daughter, you know, but it's sort of about their, you know, their different parts of their lives they're in. Yeah. And Kirk,
if their Shakespearean company had been doing The Tempest, it would have been perfect. Miranda would kill Prospero.
Yeah, or like it made me think of Forbidden Planet, stuff like that. And so I was sort of like I don't know, I was interested in both the characters, but more separately. Like I just thought like the way like Flint was portrayed was pretty cool. I like the actor and everything. And then like I like Kirk falling in love with a weird robot lady or whatever, but just that
who teaches him to play pool. You're telling me like Kirk doesn't know how to play pool, but she's like, oh, like this. I thought that was funny.
I like the pool aspect. It always comes up in Star Trek. Enterprise, they have some Vulcans playing pool as well. But I liked him falling in love with her as an idea for the story, but then her like, it's like that idea of like, it's like part of them falling in love is like her breaking free from her father figure almost. It was kind of like, okay, like, I don't know. I feel like that's too easy for Trek or something.
It isn't. Well, if Kirk falls in love with somebody every week in the third season, but it's never made super explicit. But he wants to fuck this robot. Like Flint is building this woman as a companion to him, and it's weird because I think the story would work without that if he was just a jealous father, you know, instead of a jealous lover, like all the other examples that you mentioned. I think that this is a long-running trope, the idea of a wise old father creating, be it a statue that comes to life or a robot that comes to life, a Pinocchio situation where he's creating a being that he's nurturing, but ultimately needs to go into that brave new world and that he won't control anymore. And that's sort of layered over the top of this. I'm really lonely, and I want to have sex with a robot. But also I'm Brahms and I was Beethoven and everybody else. It's just another aspect of like so many things happening in this. But I do, there's definitely like a Prospero vibe. There's definitely that sort of vibe of creating a being that's supposed to outstrip me. Now, of course, the tragedy is, and we don't know what happens. Like they fly away. He could just boot up Rena 17 and we just keep going. In fact, Rena could show up in Strange New Worlds or something like that. But as far as we know, this story is over and Flint will continue to decline. And we're supposed to kind of shake our head and think that it's a real tragedy. But I guess we don't really know the true end of the story.
Mm-hmm. Every TOS episode we cover, we should play, can this show up in Strange New Worlds?
Strange New World it.
They probably have literally gone through every episode and like put a check mark to the ones, we can do this again.
Yeah, they definitely. Well, Strange New Worlds, is of course a prequel, so that affects a lot of things. It also affects. I was thinking about this. I guess I kind of both like and don't like the fact that Spock. They are, I think, correctly portraying Spock as younger and less capable in Strange New Worlds, because he's there, and you kind of expect that he's going to know everything and save the day, like he does in TOS and in this episode. Mm-hmm. But he's kind of just one of the characters. And I think that that's fine. Yes, he's got his girlfriend and they're sort of playing off of that. And of course, Cybok's going to show up someday, waiting for that to happen. Mm-hmm. But he isn't the guy who has all the answers. Unlike in this episode where he's on top of everything. He knows that this guy's Brahms because he recognizes his hand. What? That hasn't come up in Strange New Worlds. When's he going to discover Brahms? And he vaporizes the M4. And even before they go into the robot room, he's like, I'll handle this. Let me go in there. You don't want to see what's in there.
Spock is so cool, and that just makes me think of they nailed that in the Kelvin films of like Spock just being so sweet. And you know, people, I don't know, I think they really carried forward that legacy.
Yeah.
So he's just like he shows up. Data does this a lot too, of just like, bam, I'm here. And
Good thing we had an android.
Yeah, exactly. They would totally be dead without them.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of androids in Trek. You know, they sort of make it like canon that there aren't really androids in TNG, but of course we see a ton of androids in TOS. And, you know, I'm surprised, I'm amazed, especially with Picard season 2, that they didn't somehow try to tie Noonien Soong into Flint. You know, like Noonien Soong's working on genetic engineering, and that doesn't work, and he's frustrated. Why doesn't a gray-haired guy show up at his door and hand him the folder to Project Con and be like, you keep working on this, but I'm going to work on some robots, and maybe you should check this out, you know? But I'm glad they didn't do that, of course. You know, speaking of Spock and how great he is, that's another thing that gets shoved into this episode. It's not really even a thing right until the very end, where Kirk is, of course, bemoaning the fact that they have to leave Rena Capek behind. Capek, of course, coming from Carl Capek, the author of the play R.U.R. that originated the idea, or at least the name for robots. And then suddenly McCoy just goes, hey, I haven't picked on you in this episode. Ah, you son of a bitch. You can't fucking understand how emotions work. You piece of shit. All right, I'm going to go. And then, of course, Spock gets a chance to show us that he does understand emotions, because he's going to take pity on his captain and erase this memory of this robot girl from his mind, which is something he can do. I didn't know that.
I did not remember this. I always remember.
You get this out now? My girlfriend got run over by a bus. Okay. And I had to live through that.
It is as perfect as the movie is. It's a little funny in Wrath of Khan, where he does like, remember to Bones, and I was like, wait, that's a thing he can do. But it's even funnier in this one when he goes.
Well, it's funny because, you know, Harv Bennett, to get ready for Wrath of Khan, his first movie that he'd produce for Paramount, he watched every episode and wrote down some stuff. And so he wrote down Khan, but maybe he got to Requiem for Methuselah and wrote down Forget. And then later turned it into Remember when they needed to bring Nimoy back.
That's so good. I'm thinking between Spock being so cool here, Bones just like, you know, being so ornery, and then Kirk like hooking up with the young robot lady. I actually think season 3, these characters do more resemble those Kelvin films too.
Yeah,
because this is like Kirk's always getting it on. Spock is the best. Mo Bones, you know, that's basically them.
Yes, we have season 3 of TOS to thank for the Kelvin films. I think that definitely matches.
Yeah,
I think that
I don't often think about the season quality in that, but I guess that's, people always talk about season 3, like Spock's brain and all this stuff. And
Star Trek 4, Spock's brain. I can't wait.
But still, it never clicks with me that like season 3 is like, I wouldn't even say it's bad, but it's like the one people are like, oh, that's the one where they ran out of steam or something, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely different. There's no getting around it. Speaking of differences, I think the big difference between Flint and John in The Man from Earth is that I think that Flint is not... He seems pretty sanguine about this huge role that he's had in the history of Earth, but I do think that it makes him think that he's better than us. You know,
yes,
and he also does say to Kirk,
all the stuff.
Yeah, he's like, hey, you guys are little intellectual ants, and I was Da Vinci, and also I'm really strong, so like, don't fight me.
John's not like
all
that.
It's done is all it's done is just give John perspective. You know, he has seen a lot of people. He's probably seen people smarter than his friends, and yet it doesn't make him look down on the people that he knows, because he just has this broad perspective about humanity.
He even has like a line where he sort of refers to humanity as separate from himself, like them making the wrong choice, and they kind of call him out on it, and he sort of like does, I think he like backtracks from that, like yeah, you know.
Yeah, you get what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't like lean into it. And I also just think like him, also what we mentioned about like it not being like Assassin's Creed-y, where it's like they pick the right things. He's got like one painting from Van Gogh. It seems like he lives like a pretty humble life, you know, whereas like, you know, you go to Flint and he's got, look at all my cool stuff from everyone I met, his Funko Pop collection.
Right.
he like is like, I was this guy, I was this guy, I was this guy. It's like, okay, you know, like the other people had to like ask, you know what I mean? They had to like force him to tell them he was Jesus, you know?
Yeah. And he is a Buddhist after all. If they ever did like, what do you do with the third movie? A prequel, right? So if they ever did like a prequel or had prequel scenes, I wonder if we would see that John wasn't quite so even-handed or magnanimous in the past.
He would have been, right?
Well, it seems like TOS is making the thesis that, you know, having the experience and the power and the history has made Flint somebody who has his own agenda. He wants to, he probably knows he's dying and he wants to get a girlfriend. But it seems like somebody who would be comfortable being a Superman, being, you know, a ruler, or at least feeling superior to other people. And that might be an effect of, there's a lot of, Roddenberry writes about Supermen a lot. There's a lot of Supermen in TOS. Whereas John, either we're really lucky that a man with 14,000 years of knowledge isn't a megalomaniac, or living that long has given him the perspective. If we all could live that long, we all would be vegetarian Buddhists. Do you know what I mean?
That's what I think. Really,
yeah. I would guess that is the thesis, but the film leaves you kind of it leaves it up to your own devices.
Well, it is important that it's like that he's not perfect. You know, he's not like Superman, and I think that matters. Like that he can forget, you know, things. You know what I mean? He's not like this, he can't like punch you into the sun, and he's not like the smartest man on the planet. And I think that, I don't know, I think that plays into that. Whereas like Flint, I mean, I guess he's not like this uber warrior or whatever, but they do kind of portray it as like he was sort of more of a perfect being until he left Earth.
Right. It's those fields.
Yeah, the fields. It's sort of like Superman.
Once you lose the fields, you're not a Highlander anymore.
Highlander we could have done.
Yeah. Let's not even get into that. Have you ever seen the Netflix film, The Old Guard, or read the comic that it's based on?
I've not read the comic. I have seen the movie.
Yeah. That kind of reminded me of this in a way as well. The idea that, and that's sort of based around, so there's a lot of other comics. They are making a sequel to the original Old Guard movie, but I think it's based around a more fatalistic idea that you kind of are who you are. And, you know, throughout the years, a lot of these characters in the Old Guard have just always been fighters. Like, you know, being immortal has given them the opportunity to indulge the fact that they want to fight, not because they're bloodthirsty necessarily, but because they crave like conflict, and they're souls that are never really at peace. I can imagine an Old Guard immortal who just, you know, moves to a mountain and just lives there forever. But instead, the characters that we follow are always sort of seeking out these areas of conflict, and, you know, they become mercenaries, you know, once the 20th century rolls around, because it means that they can always just be fighting and sort of doing what they think is their calling, like the reason that they're around.
And it is just interesting, like having the multiple characters there to kind of have these. That makes I guess that's more similar, like a lot of vampire stuff, but this more sort of interpersonal relationships between these immortal beings. Whereas, like, you know, with the Man from Earth, it's just like this one guy.
Yeah.
It would be kind of cool to see, like,
you might
the
just
men
be a guy
from Earth.
Right. Yeah, there you go. The third movie.
Two guys and a girl from
evil.
Earth.
Well, they at a pizza place. Because he does, like, the Nick Fury guy at the end of the second film is like, yeah, there's apparently an immortal killer. So I assume he's talking about another guy like John, right?
Oh, it's probably one of the things where they think it's John, but it's actually another guy.
It's a copycat immortal.
And like
he wants to be immortal.
So John has to prove that he's not the killer while also being hunted by the killer and the FBI at the same time.
And maybe he exposes himself in order to prove his innocence, but then in doing so becomes well known to the world at large. And then we get into Neil Breen territory. The fact that I like that these movies have this amazing scope in that there's this man that's been alive for thousands of years, but they don't ever like push into biting off more than we can chew, Neil Breen, Fateful Findings territory. You know what I mean? But if you did a thing like that where I can imagine like a blue screened reporter be like, yes, I'm here with the man who has been alive for thousands of years. The president has shot himself in the head.
And then they have to do movies about like the whole world dealing with this and like the new like the people who don't believe like the new religions that pop up.
Just keep it small.
No, this is a franchise, I'm telling you.
Well, it's a limitation of money and of technology. And something that makes Trek is its technology, the future technology, which facilitates what the characters are doing. But just as often, it's the actual complication that they have to deal with. So in every show, we randomly pick from a list of Star Trek technologies. We add what we get to the non-Trek media and subtract it from the Trek episode to see how each is different. We call this our technological exchange. And the list of technologies we pick from is phasers, holodecks, tricorders, transporters, warp drives, replicators, communicators, shields, advanced medical technology, and androids. Oh boy, don't get number 10, but we'll see. We leave it to our random number selecting technology. And the number we get is number 2. If holodecks existed in the world of the man from Earth, how would our story be different?
They could have the conversation on the holodeck instead of the room.
Yes, the museum scene at the beginning of the second movie would probably just be like holographic exhibits and things like that.
Or at the end, we reveal the whole conversation took place inside of a holodeck. And it's actually the man from Earth now in the future of Star Trek revealing this is the holonovel he wrote, but it's presented as fiction. But he's in it. I don't even know where I'm going with this, but this is my big twist episode.
As soon as Richard really keels over from a heart attack, then John just says, computer freeze program, and maybe this is him still alive in the 24th century, and he is, like you said, like recollecting like his memoirs. He has sort of written this as a play about people that were real but are now long dead, but he's remembering that time that he confessed this to all of his friends in this cabin.
And that kind of works. The story is like kind of it's kind of a little meta too, so I think now you add another layer on top of it. You even had some of the characters in it being like, oh man, I've got to go watch some Star Trek. It felt like, okay.
It's interesting because I'd like to imagine a character like John, surviving into the future, into Star Trek's future, but in a lot of ways, without necessarily there being an impending apocalypse. I kind of think of the Man from Earth as being like apocalypse fiction, or eschatological fiction, because they are highlighting the fact that this is, an era is coming to an end. And the thing about apocalypse is it isn't necessarily the earth explodes and and there's just nothing forever. It is a transition to something else, be it the biblical apocalypse where the kingdom of heaven comes to earth, or just something that it's a singularity about which we can describe nothing on the other side because we can't understand it. And I think that that's sort of like what the idea of calling out something like the Anthropocene era is that the fact that nothing will follow the models that we have from the past because we have changed our environments. You can't just predict that, every 20,000 years there'll be an ice age, the earth tilts and certain factors increase or decrease. Like, we have upset that balance for good or bad. And so we are unable to know. The future is unwritten for us. And that's kind of where the character ends up. Like, he's literally living in a cave when John Billingsley shows up.
Where he began.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's cyclical, and although he is possibly facing death as well, and so, yeah, I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't think that Jerome Bixby was predicting doom and gloom, but he is representing like the end of something.
And that's what, also in his backstory, he actually, he lived at the end of the last age, and so he at one point did represent like the birth of something new. So that's kind of cool. Like that's why he had almost this special extra layer of wisdom to him, because he saw things like, and he's lived in completely different realities to everyone. But like now here's one approaching that like not even he is prepared for.
Yeah. Nailed it. Let's move on.
Holodeck.
Before we upset the balance. Let's move on to the episode Requiem for Methuselah. Of course, they don't have holodecks in the 23rd century. But if we took away holographic technology, or even like, let's just say that they wouldn't have their flat screen TV.
Yeah. We've gone there before. We've had to do that.
They invent flat screen TVs in this. Everybody talks about how, flip phones came from communicators, but Flint and Raina are watching Kirk on a flat screen TV.
I totally forgot about that till just now, but I did like a loud go like they're watching this on current TV. I was so thrown off by that.
It's a neat thing. You'd have to imagine that,
they'd have tube TV still then.
Yeah, right. They'd be watching it on a big tube TV. There's a big bulge in the front of the bridge of the Enterprise to fit that huge cathode ray TV for their weekly screen. You'd have to imagine that, and of course, like our view of technology, like updates, with every new iteration of a franchise. So there's holograms somewhere in the 23rd century. You'd have to imagine how developing holograms would help you design things, conceptualize things. Perhaps warp theory wouldn't have made advancements without, I don't know, Zefram Cochrane being able to look at his, 2060 hologram display and describe warp fields. Something that they did not do, that they love to do, is do real thing, alien thing with Flint. Because Flint is all people that we have heard of, except for that painter guy. And he isn't like, oh, he was Da Vinci and he was Jimmy Carter. And he was. Yeah, right. Exactly. They don't do anything like that. So clearly they wanted to keep him within the realm of, what we understand and remember on Earth's history. So I wonder if he, as soon as a rocket could leave, or like Zefram Cochrane developed warp, he jumped on a ship and like got off of Earth. Like how long was he around for Earth's history?
Well, that's what makes this episode too. It feels a little like mythical, or like it feels like more of a fantasy story than a sci-fi story at times, because the way, like a lot of times in Star Trek, they try to add sort of an extra layer of like when figuring out something's from Earth, they're like, they have to like figure that out, and like, or they'll meet people and they have to be like, they haven't heard of Earth. Whereas like here they go to this guy and he just starts talking to them all like Earth is, we all know about Earth, which is not the truth in the Star Trek world. So it almost gave it this like fantastical element where it's like we're all in kind of this relative domain of Earth, the kingdom of Earth is nearby, as opposed to like it being like a, I don't know, it didn't feel as like sci-fi scientific as they try to make it when Earth comes up. Because what are the odds? Like they run into like copies of Earth and stuff like this, and like Cowboy Planet or whatever, or Gangster Planet or whatever, and it's just like the odds that they've ran into like stuff from Earth so much in Star Trek is like kind of ridiculous, I think. But they usually like try to convince you of it, like that coincidence occurring. Whereas in this, it's just like they meet a guy and he's like, yeah, you know me, I'm Da Vinci. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I just happened to be on this planet where you need this stuff. And also, unlike the character John, who basically, in so many words, says like, knowledge ain't shit because it changes all the time. I'm guessing that like Flint is able to create like robots and M4 and all the things that he has because of his accumulated knowledge. Like he just gets smarter and smarter as humanity does. And so once he left Earth, he was able to just develop robotics, on his own. Like the two pieces have different sort of takes on humanity's relationship with science and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, we have to have a Star Trek episode. So, so he's just on this planet. Here he is. There isn't any really rhyme or reason as to why this planet or why they run into him.
Right. Yeah. They start like real hot on like, there's this disease. We got to figure this out. Maybe too, that comes as like the fact that the episode is, like you said, wearing too many hats, that it's like, we don't have really time to explain everything, but you get it. You don't need to be explained, but it helps.
Yeah. It is Saurian brandy though. So at some point he, or he left Earth after we had interstellar trade and Saurian brandy became popular on Earth, but it's 100-year-old Saurian brandy though. So I feel like some enterprising Star Trek person could do the math. When did the Warp 5 Enterprise NX-01 make it far enough to a world where they got Saurian brandy? It would come back to Earth. He could get a bottle of it, then leave, and 100 years later, the Enterprise would show up at his planet, and he'd have a 100-year-old bottle of Saurian brandy.
Maybe he swung by.
Paramount, I'm willing to do that work for you if you want to pay me to do it.
He could have swung by, right, on his way out.
Or just picked it up. I'm just positing that he got it on Earth. If he went directly from Earth to his little special planet, but yeah, he could have got it, I suppose, from another place.
But then that's more decaying,
Yeah, it should have just been a bottle from from Earth.
Everything else he had is from Earth.
Yeah, and of course that leads us to like something that we haven't talked about at all, which is all the Star Trek references in those two movies. The fact that Tony Todd literally just says, I'm going to go home and watch some Star Trek. And they talk about Kirk's Spock /Vic. There is a scene where Worf tries a bottle of 70-year-old whiskey, and he's like, "Wow, that's not as good as I thought it was going to be. That's pretty bad."
Yeah, I think, they crossed the line. I feel like.
Oh no!
What was the fanfic stuff? I was like, that felt like very like. They tried hard to insert that into the movie. It did not feel natural. Whereas like Tony Todd's character like feels like the type of guy who he's captivated by the story. So he feels like a guy who's like smokes weed and watches Star Trek
episode.
Yeah, we all do that. Like, whoa, like what we do every week or every episode. We're like, whoa, this is just like Star Trek. I do that all the time. That or wrestling. I go, oh, this is like wrestling.
I'm always surprised, and maybe it's a rights thing, but I'm always surprised there aren't more Star Trek allusions in things. Like the most recent or the biggest one I can think of recently was in the movie X-Men Apocalypse, where Oscar Isaac's character Apocalypse is is another very long-lived individual who wakes up from his slumber, and he goes to a town, a civilized town, and there's a TV playing Star Trek, and they're playing Who Mourns for Adonais. And so they're obviously trying to make a parallel between like humanity confronting a godlike figure, which is what Apocalypse really is. But like, I'm surprised Star Trek doesn't show up in more stuff, little clips and things like that.
That's also in the Days of Future Past, when they're explaining the time travel. There's like clips of Kirk talking in the background, and with that, they pretty much did a Kelvin, reset in canon.
Yeah.
So they kind of have borrowed a little bit from Star Trek in the recent X-Men movies.
So this is a Bryan Singer thing then.
Yeah, or maybe it was Patrick Stewart's idea.
Oh, yeah, I suppose you've got Patrick Stewart right
maybe
there.
they're like, Patrick, we want you back in the movie, but what do we do, man? And he's like, well...
Yeah, it must be. Yeah. Well, I mean, knowing what we know now about Bryan Singer, but I'm pretty sure he's a Star Trek fan and has wanted to direct a Star Trek film. But
it's probably not
instead
going to happen.
No, it's not gonna happen now. Instead, we got Brian Fuller creating Star Trek Discovery. But that is a tale for another show. I think that's it for this week. Tell us, Gooey, what's coming up on the next episode of Backtrekking?
For our next episode, I think this is the first time we're jumping into Prodigy, but we're talking about Dreamcatcher and Terra Firma, sort of a two-parter, and how it relates to the Voyager episode Bliss, another Trek on Trek.
Yeah, a Trek on Trek for next week. And two stories about maybe things not being quite as good as they seem. And who's on the other end of this thing here? Are we going to be food?
There was a few options we had for this one too. I think it's the reason we're doing Trek on Trek is this is another one of those like kind of classic things.
Trek likes its characters rejecting pleasant fantasies, whether it's Riker's in a Romulan holodeck, but no, he's actually in an alien cave or something like that, or characters
Nexus.
kind of waking up from things. Yeah, the Nexus. Yeah, but we'll talk about all of those connections on our next episode. But that's it for this week of Backtrekking. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, tell a friend. Follow us at Backtrekking on Twitter, and tell us too what you think that we should cover in future episodes. Gooey, tell the people where they can find you online.
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at GooeyFame.
And I'm at K-A-1-I-B-A-N on Twitter. And you can find all of the content on the Just Enough Trope Network at Just Enough Trope on Twitter. And that is it for us for this week. We'll see you soon. And until then, keep on trekking.